Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage John J. DeGioia, President of Georgetown University.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you who are joining us for this very special event. Today, we celebrate the International Council on Women's Business Leadership, previously established at the State Department and now relaunched here at Georgetown's Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. And on this occasion, we have the great privilege of hearing reflections on the power of women's economic participation from the founder of the council, the Honorable Hillary Rodham Clinton. It's always a pleasure welcoming Secretary Clinton to our campus, and I'll have the honor of introducing her in just a moment. But first, I wish to say just a few words about the council. The International Council on Women's Business Leadership was founded by Secretary Clinton during her tenure as the 67th United States Secretary of State. The mission of the council is to examine the most pressing issues as they pertain to women's economic participation. Members of the council include prominent global women leaders from the private sector, government, and civil society. And we will have the chance to hear from 4 distinguished members a little later in the program. The issues that the council will focus on are deeply resonant with the mission of this university. The economic empowerment of women, the promotion of gender equality, equal access to capital and markets, and the building of capacity and skills all reflect our tradition of social justice, our commitment to equal opportunity, and our dedication to the common good. These issues are at the very heart of how we at Georgetown conceive of our place in our global family. And I wish to express my gratitude to Ambassador Milan Verveer for her ongoing leadership of the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security, and for her vision in welcoming the Council to Georgetown. At this moment in time, we recognize that no nation can achieve its fullest potential, economic or otherwise, if any segment of its population is abused, neglected, oppressed, or disenfranchised. If their voices and talents are ignored, their promise and possibility remain unrealized. It is in this context that we are greatly honored to house the International Council on Women's Business Leadership and believe deeply in the impact that it can make throughout our world. In the words of Secretary Clinton, including more women at the top of organizations, businesses, and the public sector is not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. It's good for business. It's good for results. So it's now my honor to introduce our speaker today. For nearly 4 decades and in various roles, Secretary Clinton has championed women's issues. She has strengthened opportunities for women's political, economic, and social engagement, and has long been a voice for the disenfranchised. In her acclaimed speech in Beijing in 1995, she declared that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights, and a defining moment for the global women's rights movement. Throughout her career of service and advocacy, then as First Lady, next as United States Senator, and most recently as Secretary of State, she has worked not only to highlight women's contributions, but to create and institutionalize new policies. Her efforts continue to ensure greater recognition of the roles of women in economic development, peace building, and political systems around the world. Here at Georgetown, we are honored by her dedication as the honorary founding chair of our Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my deep privilege to introduce to you and welcome to the stage the Honorable Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Georgetown. Oh my goodness. Hello. Thank you all very, very much. And it is always great to be back at Georgetown. I want to thank President DeGioia, not only for those really kind remarks, but for his real understanding and commitment to the issue that we are here to discuss today, and that is the empowerment and participation of women and girls, and in particular in the economy. Before I turn to that subject, I want to express my personal feelings about the loss of Dean Carol Lancaster. Carol was a great colleague over the last years. I traveled with her, worked with her, and when I was secretary, we looked for and created a lot of partnerships with the School of Foreign Service. And so my thoughts and prayers are with Carol's family and friends and the entire university community. She would really love to have been here because she would have heartily approved of this gathering. And she was instrumental in the creation of the first ever anywhere in the world Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. So for me, this is yet another wonderful opportunity to talk about the work that Georgetown is doing in partnership with so many others, and the model that Georgetown is providing through the Institute, which is on the brink of being replicated in other places around the world who recognize the significance of taking the subject of women, peace, and security and integrating them within a world-class academic institution like Georgetown. One of the new partners for the Institute is the International Council on Women's Business Leadership. This is a council that I started with Ambassador Verveer when I served as Secretary of State because we understood from the data that we were able to gather and what we saw as the challenges confronting women here at home and around the world, that economic participation needed much more attention. And I was very pleased that so many women business leaders from around the globe were willing to join this council, and the council has now moved to establish its permanent home from the State Department to Georgetown. And leaders have traveled from across the world, from every hemisphere, every continent to participate. And I want particularly to thank the co-chairs, Cherie Blair, who is with us today, and Beth Brooke Marciniak, who was traveling in Asia. And of course, I am deeply grateful to my friend, your fellow Georgetown alum, the first ambassador for global women's issues, Milan Verveer, for spearheading so much of this work. When we first convened this council at the State Department in January of 2012, there may have been a few, or maybe more than a few, foreign policy traditionalists thinking, is it really worth a Secretary of State's time to start a program on women's economic participation? Is this really the kind of issue that demands sustained and high-level attention? Well, as I wrote about in my book, Hard Choices, that described the 4 years I was privileged to serve as secretary, the answer for me is very clearly yes. Because when you're in a position in the world that we have around us today, such as Secretary of State, you of course have to deal with the immediate crises, with the brewing crises, with the crises over the horizon, but you also have to look for ways of leveraging the kind of outcomes that you hope are achievable here in our country and more importantly around the world that will lead to greater peace, prosperity, and progress. And of course, there's a very compelling moral case to be made, and we should never shy away from or quit saying that women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. But there's also a pragmatic economic case that undergirds that moral imperative. I remember during the 90s as First Lady traveling across Africa, and everywhere I looked, I saw women working. I saw them working in their fields, in their market stalls, carrying water, carrying firewood, selling crafts. So I asked some of the economists that we were meeting with, how do you evaluate the contributions that women make to the economy here? And I'll never forget, one replied, we don't, because they don't participate in the economy. Now, what he meant was classic economic analysis. He meant the formal economy, the economy of the jobs one does in offices or factories, the work that sustained families, that created opportunities for these women to gather some income in the markets or to produce enough food to feed their family with maybe a little left over, was just not counted. And that got me thinking, what would happen if women stopped working in the informal economy? Well, I said to the economists, wouldn't your analysis mean that you wouldn't be counting what they were doing in the informal economy, but the economy would stop? Well, yes, that is a point, he said. And it is a point that we're finally beginning to grapple with. Because it is true that if more women have the opportunity to participate fully in the formal economy, they, their families, and their communities will prosper. For example, we know that in India, where women spend an average of 6 hours a day performing unpaid labor, the gross domestic product would grow by $1.7 trillion if women participated in the formal labor force at the same level as men, or even if the work they were now doing, like in those market stalls, if their activities were more respected, that they would be included in the calculation of the formal economy. Now, I know there must be some economics students here, and I hope you will think about this issue. How do you evaluate the work in the so-called informal economy? Because yes, we do want more women to move from the informal economy to the formal economy. That's what the council is focused on. But we also want, insofar as it is possible, to evaluate the contributions from the informal economy. Now, unfortunately, a new global report released just this week again confirmed that despite some small improvement, the gender gap in economic participation and opportunity remains high around the world, and the consequences are significant. Because if we closed the gap in workforce participation between men and women around the world, GDP would grow by nearly 12% by 2030. So at the State Department, as we began to try to integrate women's participation, opportunities, and rights into our foreign policy objectives, we began to look for and ask for the creation of more data. Because if you present this kind of data about what it would mean for the gross domestic product of nations and regions and even of the world that is accessible and compelling, heads start nodding even among skeptical leaders in both the public and the private sectors. That's why at the Clinton Foundation, my daughter Chelsea and I are heading up an initiative called No Ceilings. We are collecting and analyzing a vast amount of data to map out the gains women and girls have made in the past 20 years since the conference in Beijing, but also to highlight the gaps that remain. Nearly 2 decades after the United Nations Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing called for, in the Platform for Action, full participation in every aspect of society, a growing number of leaders have come to understand how important this is. They see we cannot afford to leave talent on the sidelines or money on the table. We began rolling out our thinking behind this agenda at the conference concerning APEC, the Asian Pacific Economic Community, that the United States was sponsoring in 2011. APEC's San Francisco Declaration is an example of momentum that is building. It focused on the most serious obstacles facing women in business: access to capital, access to markets, skills training, capacity building, and leadership. And these challenges have guided the work of this council as well. Let's look at two: access to capital and leadership. Now, globally, researchers estimate the financing gap for women-owned small and medium-sized businesses, where the greatest acceleration of growth occurs. That's where most of the jobs, not just in our country, but in the world, come from. That gap between financing women's businesses and men's businesses is around $285 billion. Yet we know that if more women had access to credit, more businesses would get off the ground, more jobs would be created, more revenue generated. Similarly, women still face fewer opportunities to rise up the corporate ladder and hold leadership positions. Only 5% of the CEOs of Fortune Global companies are women. This is despite the fact that it's now been very convincingly shown that when women have a seat at the corporate board table, their perspectives often improve corporate governance and performance. Through our council's partnerships and our programs, we've made some encouraging progress in these areas, but we know there's more to be done. Laws and regulations are still on the books in more than 100 countries that limit women's economic participation. There's a substantial gender gap in internet connectivity and mobile use. That limits women's abilities to take advantage of new opportunities. And as our economies evolve and more women do enter the workforce, new challenges emerge. When Prime Minister Abe was elected in Japan, he said one of the best things he could do to get the Japanese economy moving again would be to get more educated, innovative women into the workforce. He called it women economics. I had a chance to sit down with the Prime Minister just a few weeks ago at the Clinton Global Initiative in New York to talk with him about what he meant by this and what his government was trying to do about it. He spoke about the obstacles discouraging Japanese women, educated women, in a highly developed country from entering the workplace and the cultural shifts that are needed to break down those barriers. Expanding flexibility in the workplace, access to childcare and elder care would boost productivity and allow more parents, men as well as women, to work full days without stress and heartache. In Japan, it's especially a difficult problem because, as Prime Minister Abe explained, Japanese women are primarily responsible for both child care and elder care. There are not the kind of alternatives that exist in many other societies. There's a very low rate of immigrant labor coming into the country, so there's not a workforce that can be put to work or trained to work. And so when he talks about trying to get women into the formal economy, he is opening the door to the whole debate around work-family balance and around the care that is necessary to be provided. There's nothing more important than caring for one's family members. How is that accomplished in a way that will benefit individuals, families, and the entire country? Now, we face obstacles here in the United States as well. 4 in 10 primary breadwinners are now women. Yet American women still make less than men for doing the same job. a lack of flexible and predictable scheduling, affordable childcare, paid sick leaves, and paid leave, we are one of the few countries without it, keep too many women on the sidelines. A few weeks ago, while we were in the hospital waiting for our granddaughter, little Charlotte, to make her grand entrance, one of the nurses came up to me and said, "Thank you for fighting for paid leave." And she went on to tell me she sees families every day who struggle to balance work and parenthood. In fact, she does it herself. Even while she's taking care of someone else's baby, her thoughts are with her own, who's watching her child. What if her child gets sick? How's she going to be in two places at once? This is the constant interior dialogue that goes on for the vast majority of women, mothers in our country. So we know that we've made progress. The women on this council are clear evidence of that. Some of the brightest minds in the world are gathered here. Business leaders, diplomats, heads of multilateral organizations, senior government officials, issue experts, and they're helping us think through how we solve these challenges. And I'll give you a great example we just heard about from our council. One of our council members from Indonesia said she had done a study of markets because most of the people, 90% of the people working in markets, which is still the place where most people in the world, not supermarkets, but real on-the-ground local markets, get their food, get their other goods that they need to run their households. So she did a study. 90% of the people working in the markets are women. There are no toilets available for women in the numbers that they represent. Think about it. It's such a simple thing. There's certainly no childcare. So is there a safe place you can leave your child while you're bustling around trying to sell in the marketplace? And maybe your hours are going to be severely restricted because there's no place to use a restroom. I recently met with my husband with the new Prime Minister of India, Prime Minister Modi. He is very focused on basics like sanitation. Girls, as they get older, cannot go to school if there is no sanitation. Women can't get very far from home because there is no toilet. So we in this council are looking at everything from truly the most basic barriers that enable girls and women to go on to higher education, enable them to be in the workforce away from their homes for some period during the day, all the way to how do we get more women on corporate boards and into executive positions. We're really here today to invite the students of Georgetown to help us problem solve, to think through ideas that you might be either aware of or thinking about, and share with the Institute for Women, Peace, and Security as we continue this work. In a few minutes, there'll be a panel discussion with leaders from the United Kingdom, Israel, Indonesia, and the United States, so we can get into more depth on some of these issues. But this is finally on the global agenda. We've come a long way since I had those discussions back in Africa in the 1990s, where it just didn't register that there was a problem. Women were in the informal economy, everybody knew that, but it didn't count for anything, and there was no real effort being made to open the doors to try to help more women get into the formal economy. So we need to be looking at what has worked in communities around the world. We need to scale and sustain past ideas, collaborate, bring more models that have a great partnership between the public and the private sector and civil society. Because if you look at the data that has been generated by the World Bank, by the IMF, by the OECD, by private sector analysts, we, in a time where The global growth rate is not yet what it needs to be. It has not fully recovered from the Great Recession and crisis of '07, '08, '09. We've made more progress comparatively in the United States, but we still have millions of Americans who have not recovered their income, who don't have job security, who are long-term unemployed. So why would we ignore any solution that might work? And if you look at the data, and I invite you all to do that, and we're going to be producing more data through the Clinton Foundation No Ceilings initiative, it's very clear that the more women we can get to participate fully and get paid equal pay for equal work, the faster our economy will recover, and economies across the world likewise. The GDP projections that have been calculated, if we could get women's labor force participation to equal men's, are really staggering. You know, in developed countries, it can be 8, 9, 10% of an increase in GDP over the next 15, 20 years. In less developed countries, it could be 30 to 40%. So this issue about how we create jobs in the global economy today for men and women, how we really help prepare young people for the jobs that are going to be available through education and training. This is going to be one of the most significant questions for public policy and for private sector decision makers, as those of you who are students here graduate and go out into the world of work. We need more entrepreneurship. We need to encourage more young people to start businesses. We need more seed capital. We need more crowdfunding. We need more access. We need more mentoring and teaching about business plans and how you deal with the economy and the stresses that you will face. We have a whole menu of issues that will be relevant to men and women. But if we pay some extra attention to getting women into the formal economy, it will be good for everybody. We cannot get ahead in the United States or anywhere by doing what we used to do, because that's not the world in which we live today. We have to unlock the potential of every person and grow the economies of every nation. It's the only way we're going to be able to grow together and create a middle class that is dynamic and strong and creating jobs and opportunities for generations to come. With this new grandchild of ours, you know, we spent a lot of time looking at her and a lot of time thinking about what we want to do for her. And there certainly is no doubt that her parents and her grandparents and her extended family will do all that we can to make sure she has every opportunity to fulfill her own God-given potential. But we also worry about the world that she will inherit as an adult. What will be the opportunity available to her and to others in 20 to 25 years as they enter adulthood? Here in our country, we call it the American dream. Others have different variations on that, but we've always believed that every generation, by working hard, can do better than the last. We've been confident and optimistic through hard times. We've rebounded, we've shown resilience, but we need to make some adjustments. Our system has to be better prepared to deal with the realities of the world we're in today. You're getting great preparation here at Georgetown, one of the premier places for your education. But you should not have to be someone who goes to Georgetown, or in our case, the granddaughter of a former president who also happened to go to Georgetown, to be given the tools and to have the support of your community as well as your family. Now, Bill and I talk a lot. We came from different backgrounds, but boy, did we have extraordinary opportunities. He from Arkansas, me from outside of Chicago. And in addition to the public schools and the public parks and the stable economic opportunities that were patched together by our respective families over time, the hard work that went into that, we believed that there was this unlimited potential out there. That's what I want you to believe. But not just you, people your age, not very far from here, who maybe didn't finish high school, maybe are in the workforce, could not dream of being in this magnificent Gaston Hall, but who are part of our larger community, our web of responsibility. We will do so much better if we remember that we should find a way to help everybody. And this council is looking specifically about how we help girls and women to fulfill their own economic potential. Thank you all very much.
So now to expand on what Secretary Clinton said about doing what every country wants to see, grow its economies, create jobs, ensure inclusive prosperity for its people, we're going to have a conversation among 4 remarkable women who, as you heard, come from 4 different parts of the world. And they comprise the sectors that need to work together, that so-called golden triangle: the private sector, government, and nonprofits, civil society, philanthropy. And after we have a conversation among ourselves, we're going to open this to the students for your questions, so think about what you might want to ask them. And I'm going to ask the panelists, as I introduce you, if you wouldn't please come forward and take your seats. So I want to welcome back Cherie Blair to Georgetown. Cherie today heads the Cherie Blair Foundation for Women, which supports women entrepreneurs in developing countries, providing them with skills, technology, networks, and access to capital so they can better contribute to their economies. She has had a distinguished legal career and is well known for her work in human rights law. Today, she also chairs Omni Strategy, a law firm, and of course, she is married to the former Prime Minister of the UK, Tony Blair. Cherie, happy to have you. Anne Finucane is the Global Strategy and Marketing Officer for Bank of America and a member of the company's executive management. She also leads Bank of America's Corporate Social Responsibility Program, which uses the capabilities of the company and its global platform to work with a range of partners. She has repeatedly been on every list as one of the most powerful women in banking, and Anne, we want to welcome you back to Georgetown. The Honorable Mari Pagnestu is the former Minister of Trade and later the Minister for Tourism and the Creative Economy in Indonesia. She is a powerful leader who has been called the woman behind Indonesia's economic growth. She is regarded as a well-known economic expert on trade, and she's also been on the faculty of economics in the University of Indonesia and is widely published as a professional economist. Bear in mind that Indonesia is Southeast Asia's most populous country and its largest economy. Maureen. And Ofer Strauss is the chairperson of the board of the Strauss Group, an international corporation with a portfolio of 5 companies and thousands of employees around the world. She, too, has been ranked repeatedly as one of the top businesswomen in the world, on lists from Fortune to Forbes to Financial Times. She is also the president of Jasmine, a program that works with Jewish and Arab women who are engaged in small and medium-sized businesses in Israel, an example of effectively combining free enterprise and social responsibility. And we welcome Ofra with us today. So thank you all for being here. Cherie, we heard Secretary Clinton just talk a bit about the importance of women's participation in the economy and certainly the role that women entrepreneurs have in starting small businesses and growing them. Their potential is largely untapped around the world. You have a foundation now that has been doing extraordinary work in training and mentoring women in entrepreneurship. Give us a sense of what difference that makes and how you partner with others in a collaborative way to ensure that this work can go on.
Well, the difference, of course, it makes if you can get women, as Secretary Clinton has said, to participate in the formal economy is vast, both for the economy itself and its growth, but also for the impact it has on their families and their communities. Research shows time and time after again that women reinvest all the money that they make back into the home and into the wider community. So it makes good business sense to help women participate. As for the foundation, what we have tried to do is to work with small and medium-sized entrepreneurs in developing countries, and in particular in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, to help them expand and grow their business, partly by giving them capacity training, partly by giving them opportunities for mentoring, and particularly by harnessing the power of technology. And I think one of the ways we've done that most successfully is by not trying to do it all ourselves, but by partnering with others. That's other non-profit associations working in this area, and also with the private sector and with government. And a great example of that is our mentoring platform, which was highlighted, in fact, in the International Council of Women Business Leaders last report. In relation to that, what we do is that we team up. Thanks to Google, we have a global mentoring platform which now operates in 55 different countries, and where we've reached now nearly 1,500 women mentees, and we match them with men and women mentors from across the world. So how do we find our mentees? By partnering with other organizations such as the US State Department, and other NGOs who are already working in this area, and asking them, do they have women on their programs who would benefit from a consistent year-long support of 2 hours a month over the internet from somebody who tries to help them grow and expand their business. Where do we find our mentors? Well, people come along and apply to join, but we also have great business partnerships. For example, the partnership that we have with Anne and Bank of America, where Bank of America, at the moment, I think we've got 125 mentors from Bank of America. And as well as the individual partnerships on the platform, we also support the women so that they can talk to each other. We have a network of information and advice, and we've recently entered into a great partnership with Facebook, where Facebook have now got a special area on Facebook where they're giving our women mentees training on how to use Facebook to expand and grow the marketing of their businesses. But I think Anne will agree that it's been very interesting to us not only to see the impact this has made on the women themselves, where overwhelmingly over 99% of the women mentees in this last intake increased their confidence. 94% of them gained in their business knowledge. And 84% of them got new business opportunities because of the mentoring platform. But what was interesting in the Bank of America is 100% of the Bank of American mentors also found that they grew in their own knowledge and confidence and experience of the world, which I think made Bank of America rather happy. But interestingly, and we heard this today too, in the council today, often many women set up businesses, but then many of those businesses do fail. And 27% of our mentees with Bank of America said that had it not been for the advice and support of their mentor, their business might have gone under. So I think there's a real need here to support women in this way. And the great thing about the internet is it means that I can be sitting in London or in New York or in Mumbai, and I can be supporting a woman in Kenya or in Israel or in Indonesia. And so really, it's a resource for the world.
Thank you, Cherie. And, mentoring and training are extremely important. But I remember meeting with some young entrepreneurs whom you had worked with at a project in Nablus, and they all had developed a terrific business strategy, and they wanted to really start their businesses. And access to capital is not so easy. And Anne, you run a very big bank, or you close to run that bank. I'm wondering, how can financial institutions be more creative in responding to this need? And it's not just the world over without the United States. It includes the United States as well. I remember traveling with Hillary Clinton once when a woman in desperation said to her, "We have a terrific business plan. We know this is going to work. We've got a niche, but we can't get that first loan." And then she said, "The best ideas die in bank parking lots." So, Anne, how do we create a way to solve some of this enormous challenge?
Well, we certainly want people to die in bank parking lots, so let's see if I can resurrect that a little bit. Well, of course, we give a lot. Banks at their best, are like a financial transportation system. They should be helping economies move forward through the movement of money. And it is true that, for the most part, you're giving small business loans or commercial loans to people that have a track record. So the real difference is, when you don't have a track record, what do you do? And that would be true in the U.S. and outside the U.S. One mechanism, there are a couple of mechanisms we've tried to use, and we're not alone. I think the financial services industry is getting a little more savvy about this. And that would be through the use of CDFIs. So CDFIs are community development financial institutions. They don't require the same amount of history in terms of making money or a game plan, but they do require sort of a hands-on approach. Banks give money to CDFIs. CDFIs, in turn, give money to those that have a lower credit rating or perhaps no credit rating, along with some education. So the banks are sort of fueling this. They provide a below-market lending rate to the CDFIs along with grant dollars. The CDFIs, in turn, can give to these early-stage, very small companies, from microfinance, very small loans, up through $50, $60, even $200,000. And it can be for housing, or more specifically, it's usually for small business. And this is, we've done $1 billion worth of this kind of lending over the last several years, but we haven't focused our attention on women, small businesses, very small businesses, as much as we could have. So in the last year or two, what we've done is, in the U.S., taken a very specific amount of money, $10 million worth of lending, and worked with Elizabeth Street Capital, Tory Burch, in trying to find these women and get the movement going. And we're beginning to work with Cherie outside the U.S. through the Calvert Foundation. Again, it's a partnership, so it's not one thing. It's a bank, a nonprofit, and a third party, a government sort of exercise to try to get some money flowing into these small businesses, very small businesses.
So, Ofra, let's move to another kind of challenge, all in the world of growing small and medium-sized businesses, which we know, as the Secretary said, are that great accelerator of growth in economies. A couple of years ago, I visited the Jasmine Project in Tel Aviv, which was working to support Arab and Jewish small and medium-sized businesses run by women in Israel. I later learned, I didn't know on my first visit, but I later learned that you have been instrumental in its leadership. And it was a project that was indeed making a difference. So why did you get involved? You're a top businesswoman. Why did you get involved in being so catalytic in making this project succeed? And do you think that businesswomen and others in business, because we need all the good men in this, can contribute to efforts of peace and security?
Well, I have a few minutes to talk about really my most important subject that I deal with, which is business. To talk about Israel, small businesses, and peace. So, excuse me if I will not cover all of it in 3 minutes. But I'll just say, you know what?
You can go a little longer. It's a very important topic.
Yeah, okay. But I just, it starts really with the fact that I realized, like all of you, in many ways, I was privileged. I was privileged to really given the chance to be part of a great business, which my grandmother, by the way, started. And it's really, I thought it's obvious. It's obvious that I'll get the chance. I thought it's obvious that I was asked to work really, really hard. And if I'll prove myself, I'll get any job I want in the world, by the way. And actually, the first opportunity was here in the US. I was accepted to work at Estée Lauder. So it really starts with giving chance to others and to me especially. And really, when I got and I became the chair of our business, I thought it's obvious. It's obvious that if you work hard and if you do everything you can, you get what you thrive. The first interview I gave as a chair, I was asked, how is it to be a woman in the business world? I said, what do you mean? And then I really realized when I looked at the numbers, I was the only chairperson in Tel Aviv, top 100 companies. So at the beginning, it was really nice to be by myself. Really, I was. But then I really realized it's not the case. And I really decided to use the fact that I am influential. And yes, it's not always that nice. To do, really, to help other women become part of the business world. And for us in the business world, really, it's all about the bottom line. So it is a great business case, and you look at the numbers, and you all students here, it's very easy. There are articles. It's a great business case we buy. So it makes sense to invest in women. But still, I am involved in this issue for the last 5 years, and to move the needle, it is difficult. Because like every business that we start, entrepreneurship, you need a vision, you need a very detailed program to make it happen. So I am in this journey. I'll share with you some of my experience, and lots of it is really not yet shown in numbers. So within our business, any business, there in the P&L we have expenses. One of them is really salaries, or okay, how much we pay. That's what we ask, in any board meeting. And the other one is how much money we spend on buying. So on those two parts of the P&L, really we can influence not only how much we pay, but who do we pay for. So how many women do we have in our workforce? I started to measure it, and really I thought if I'll just tell the organization I want 50-50 women on the management and I want 50-50 women in everything we do, that it will move and it will happen. No, it doesn't. So it is again about education. It's about really students. It's about the next generation. It is about doing it together, the whole management, men and women. So this is within the organization. And then it's about, okay, how much money we spend on procurement and buying. That's the only question I knew how to answer till I became part of the Women Council. And then I learned diversity in suppliers is an issue. So it's a long question or long answer to how did I get to this thing which is called small businesses. And actually, when I came back from our meeting, I asked the procurement manager in our company, who do we buy from? He said, what do you mean? I said, okay, how many women-owned businesses, how many men? He said, you never asked it. I said, okay, I start to ask. Actually, you know what? It's about that, it's about those questions, it's about that's what it means, that it matters. And by the way, it took us almost a year and a half to know exactly who are the owners of the businesses we buy from. That's how I actually said yes when I was asked to be the head of Jasmine, which is a women-owned business. Small, of course, most of the businesses. But what made a difference for me is that it's about Jewish and Arab-owned businesses. So in every country, when you look at that diversity, women is not one color, one shape. No, it is about the same diversity. I'm sure it's about the US. No, I know it's about the US. I employ here. I know it's in every country that we talk about. And I had the privilege to really run or to be the chair of an organization that speaks in 3 languages, Arabic, English, and Hebrew, because the women who are part of our organization don't speak one language. So inclusiveness is that. But I think in all of you, especially after this summer, and the news, if you open the news, is about the war, it's about the aggression, it's about all the things that we in the Middle East suffer from. Jasmine is an island. We are Jewish and Arab women sitting together. It's about our business. It's about empowerment. It's about making money. It's about feeding the families. It's about business. But it's also really talking about or looking what does it mean when we share same goals. The thing of peace, if you need an optimistic voice here, it can be done. Just because I can see it really in Jasmine. And we have this dream that one day, in every Arab countries, you'll see Jasmines, and we will collaborate, because at that moment, we cannot really, because of the situation in the Middle East. So women empowerment, women-owned business is a movement. If we work together, and the US is a vital voice. If you ask yourself, you Americans, if it is important that you'll express your opinion, that you will influence, I can say very clearly, yes, democracy matters.
Thank you, Ofra. So, Minister, we've gone from nonprofit area to business. You've been in government for many years with portfolios that are extremely important to the economy of Indonesia. How important is the partnership with government in all of this? And what are some of the challenges that you had to confront in terms of, and Indonesia still confronts, because obviously this is all a continuing process, but in terms of moving women from informal economy to the formal economy and growing their role in the formal economy?
Yes, thank you. I'm very pleased to be here today to share the experiences from a developing country and a policymaker's viewpoint. And it's, to transform yourself from thinking about it and having to actually implement policy has been quite an interesting journey for me in the last 10 years in government. And I was just reflecting just then, where does the switch come from? But the switch came before I became minister, when I was working with Jeffrey Sachs on the UN Millennium Goals on poverty alleviation. And we were in Africa, and we were talking about village empowerment and how important it was to have decision-making done by the village as to how what the money would be used for to help the village. And it turned out that when you had the men decide what they wanted the money to be used for, they wanted it to be used for a parabola so that they could watch football. And the women wanted the money to be used for having a piping system so that they didn't have to spend 3 hours a day getting water. And that was kind of the light switch in me, and I said, okay, it's not just about women participation in the economy, it's actually even more basic than that. It's about the decision making from the beginning as to what the money should be allocated for. And that was an important lesson for me going into government, as to how important it was to involve the women in the decision making. You're not even talking about informal to formal. It's even more basic than that. So myself and Sri Mulyani, when we went into government, we had very much that in the back of our minds. So that when we were implementing policy, when you say mainstreaming gender, it sounds so good and so easy to do on paper, but when you actually try to implement it on the ground, it's not always that easy. So we tried very hard to try to think about it, and we always try to influence the men, of course, because we were still, even though we had doubled the number of women in the cabinet at the time from 2 to 4, and it was, and our president, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, he was actually very open-minded, and he gave important portfolios to women. I was in charge of trade, and Sri Mulyani was in charge of finance, so we were relatively, as you could say, able to influence the policy making. I'll give you a few examples as to how, in practice, how would you actually do it if you actually have to think about it. Secretary Clinton mentioned the example of the traditional markets. As Minister of Trade, one of my first jobs was to revitalize the traditional market, and that's all informal sector. And 90% of the traders are women, and 90% of the people who shop are women. And when I went into the market, I was aghast because the toilets were not designed for women. They were traditional, because it was the men who were designing the markets and doing the construction. So that was, and then I was seeing women working as in the market. They had babies there and they had children running around in the mess of the market. And I said, this is not right. And that's when I started to introduce, you have to redesign the market because it is the women who are working there, et cetera, et cetera. And then we managed to make sure that there are childcare centers and toilets that were properly designed. And guess what? You know what the profit centers were? The childcare center and the toilets became profit centers because it's not free. They pay, but not a huge amount. But it's small business, right? So these are solutions. And then the second example, it was myself and Sri Mulyani. When we had to deliver the cash transfer program after the raise of the fuel price. And all the empirics are important, I'm a great believer in the data, show that again, it goes back to my parabola and water example. If you give the women the money for the cash transfer, because you're talking about giving it to the poor, you are more likely it's going to be used to put food on the table and save a little bit for the education. All the empirics show that. So we wanted to give the money to the women, and our president supported it. But unfortunately, because of the regulation, because of the family card, it's the men as the head of the family, we couldn't do it. Yeah. But eventually, we started to develop programs where we could actually give the money to women. Same thing with cash for work. Cash for work, it was all in construction. It's only for men. And I said, hey, come on, cash for work during a crisis is not just for men, it has to be for women too. You can't just give it only for making roads. It has to be also for women. So you have to really think about it and show the economic value for women. So we used a lot of the arguments, and I think we really appreciate what Secretary Clinton did in 2011 to put it on the table that it's about the economics, it's about the business. Women have that value. It's not just about equality or human rights, it's about the economics. And that really helped us a lot in pushing forth the argument as a policymaker, as well as, including the men in the policy-making table. And again, then we transformed it into the business side, including the access to capital and the microfinancing, where we found that women I'll just give you one more example. I'm just giving you, real examples of how we try to deal with the issue. When you look at the micro enterprises, I think our numbers show that only 23% of SMEs in Indonesia are being run by women. And it turns out it's because of and they're smaller businesses than the men-owned businesses, and they have less access to capital. So there are institutional and cultural constraints. And when they did the survey, they asked, why are women less confident to go to the banks to get a loan? And one of the reasons given was, well, I'm afraid I cannot pay back my loan because the moment somebody gets sick in my family, I'm the one that has to take care of that sick person, and then I cannot pay my debt, and I don't want to be in the position to not be able to pay my debt. So what happened was some of our banks, and it became good business, they bundled the financing package with insurance and saving, because they also worry about the education, saving enough for the education of their kids. So a number of our banks came out with micro credit that bundled the banking services with the insurance and the savings, and taught the women and gave them confidence that don't worry, if somebody falls sick, there's an insurance here. And that really worked. And the government supported that in the financial inclusion agenda that we developed later on. So these are, I think, real life examples where it's not just, we're not even talking about going from informal to formal. We're just taking care of the formal. And I think giving financial literacy and confidence for women to be able to just even to go into a bank, and the banks have also figured out that this is a very, very psychologically, they don't even have the confidence to enter into a nice-looking office. So they bring the banks to the villages. Whether it's mobile banking or creating, a more comfortable situation for the women to be given just the financial literacy to begin with. So those are just some of the challenges that I faced, and I really look forward to working more on these issues.
Well, you were actually far ahead in some ways, because we're starting to catch up, understanding that credit and savings and insurance all matter in these propositions. We're going to go one quick round here and then open it up to questions, so be ready for that. Cherie, you have made a big footprint on showing us that we've got a gender gap in mobile technology. And we have with us on the council a representative from Intel. They've done a big study on the gender gap in the internet. And why is this gender gap, why is it critical to close it? What is going to happen to women in this 21st century economy if we don't address this?
Well, it's definitely true that knowledge is key in this. And in today's world, the mobile phone in particular, I think, is the poor person's computer and the poor person's access to knowledge. So going back to what we've just heard about in Indonesia, we did a program called the Business Women's App, which was based, we had it in Indonesia, in Tanzania, and in Nigeria. I'm sure there are students here from the economics department, and they will probably agree with me that sometimes the business concepts aren't necessarily natural. I met many, many women with businesses who think so long as I produce things and keep churning them out, then surely I'll have a successful business. Whereas in fact, of course, it's all about, as you said, offer the P&L and what's the difference between capital and income. There are all sorts of concepts. What do you deal with when you take on other employees? And so we tried to put together, using text messaging, a basic, I call it a nano MBA. It's a basic hints and tips for business women using the mobile phone. They get 4 text messages a week with some information that was worked on with local universities, so it was properly specific to the information they needed to know for their countries. It was in the local language. And we had that course just assessed, and we've actually just today, thanks to ExxonMobil Foundation, been able to publish the results of that assessment. And it shows quite clearly that if you can give targeted information to the women, like the women in the market that you were talking about, they will take that information and use it in their business and actually turn those businesses into even more of a success, or sometimes stop them becoming a failure. And we believe that we can use that even more. And what we want to do now, because that was with ExxonMobil Foundation and Nokia, but it was only on Nokia handsets, we want to take this now to businesswomen 0.2 and actually make it more widely available, because we believe that whilst it's great for people to be able to come to university and do MBAs, there are a lot of people out there already doing business who haven't had access to the formal education system that we all take for granted. But that doesn't mean that they can't learn and benefit from business training delivered using the poor person's computer, which is the mobile phone. So that's something that we want to see, and I know the council is going to be involved in how we can work with the big companies in the tech field to actually show how mobile can be a force for good.
And there are so many good examples today from the kind of information that can come to people who would ordinarily not get it in terms of health information, vital health information, to knowing where the market is on a given day. Instead of walking for miles and miles and miles.
That's absolutely. We also did in Gujarat a mobile app which was for rural women who were selling agricultural goods and who used to have to walk up to a day at a time to get to the wholesalers to actually get the goods. When they get there, they didn't necessarily have the ones they wanted. We transferred that through the wholesalers onto a computer in the wholesaler and mobile phones for the women sellers, and they saw 200-300% increases in their turnover, which, is one of the women said to me, meant that whereas before she was a widow, she and her 2 children were getting 1 meal a day, now they could have 2 meals a day and her children could go to school. So, I mean, this is a life-transforming thing, and there's so much more we can do with mobile value-added services, and that's just only starting.
So, Anne, let's go to the other end of the spectrum. A lot of talk today about women on corporate boards, women bumping up against that glass ceiling in management. We're producing far more women with all kinds of degrees, and yet they seem stuck in some ways. I have a friend who says it's not a glass ceiling or a sticky floor, it's just a thick layer of men. So how do we, and how do you at Bank of America, I know you've been very much focused on what you can do to move women within your company, the kind of internal prospects. How do you do some of that, and what more do you think we need to do generally?
I think we all have to do more, period. And that thick layer of men we have to sort of thin out. But, you know, we're in an industry that has gone through a sea change, the financial services industry. And generally when there's chaos, there's opportunity. And I would say that in your personal life, and I think it's also true in a very large company. And the women's voices at a table have made a real difference in our company in recent years. So 1/3 of our board of directors are women. Half the management of the company that are, you know, VP and above are women. And I do think that has made a huge difference in terms of just the conversation, let alone the progress we've made. So it isn't what was wrong with the men, it was just simply that women need to be at the table in the same way in economic terms. If the women aren't in business, then we're tying one hand behind our back no matter what country you're from. So that's been a big thing for us. And the other thing is in just having the relationship with Cherie or the Vital Voices or with the Tory Burch Foundation, we find our own women very enthused by this opportunity. We now have men that are participating in the Cherie Blair Foundation mentoring because they feel just as much satisfaction. And I think what it does is it gets everybody thinking about, let's be a little more entrepreneurial, let's think a little bit more progressively. In our case, we're a huge company, but we have 15 million people that mostly do their banking on mobile banking in a completely developed world. And yet they have some of the very same questions about financial literacy. We did a big program on financial literacy for years. I mean, I think people think it's like paint drying. They don't love it. And yet when we became a partner with Sal Khan, who does Khan Academy and does online education, and he's the best, I think, in the world doing this, and we interviewed our own people, let alone the marketplace, we redid everything, and we got very basic. It was in these digestible bites of, you know, before you tell me how to create a nest egg, could you just hold up the paycheck and tell me why I'm only really taking home half of what I thought I made? And when you get practical, it makes a difference, and it makes the people in your company feel better about you. So it's all those things, not one of those things. But I really just have to thank that the nonprofits that we've worked with, because they've enlightened us.
Ofra, we've talked a lot about the power of small and medium-sized businesses, and it's been particularly hard for women to be able to move into the space, but when they do, to ensure that they can grow. Give us just a quick snapshot of the state of women-owned small and medium-sized businesses in Israel.
Just to put in a different light the whole thing of small, medium-sized businesses and academic. Okay, we are here in the academy world. Actually, small, medium-sized businesses is a measurement of entrepreneurship. So what you see actually in emerging markets or developing countries is that usually women or small businesses open because they want to provide food to their family and kids. In developed countries, and by the way, Israel is one of them, it's actually a measurement of entrepreneurship. People open, or women, or people as a whole, open businesses because they are entrepreneurs. So really, when you think about economy, everyone talks about entrepreneurship as a measurement or a way to grow the economy. Small, medium-sized businesses are the vehicle to actually make it happen. So when I started to really look at the numbers and understand very well what it means and where we are on this curve, it was just a different way to talk to our government about why is it so important. And when we looked at the numbers, what we saw is actually the women, the amount of women-owned businesses is really very small. The other fact and figure is access to capital, mentoring. Women all around the world, no matter which country, which state the country is, we have same issues. So let's share. So if globalization means anything for small, medium-sized businesses owned by women, one thing, issues, obstacles, and opportunities are the same, and we can really start to share how to really help small and medium-sized businesses. So in Israel, just as a nutshell, because it does reflect things that are in every country, even very rich countries, have within their society emerging markets. So they are the ones who are privileged and they are participating in economy. And there are always those emerging markets, whether it's because it's religion that makes them at the outskirts of society or because of the color of their skin or 100 things. So whatever it is that we share here, it's really relevant to every country. So in our own country, in my country, in Israel, there are really, yes, Jewish and Arabs. So the Jewish women have more access to capital than the Arab women. There are a lot of reasons why, but again, most of them do not have record and really banks, and they're all here, really want to see record of few years of really working. The other thing is, which is common to all of us, women, when they give birth, stay at home. We don't really think about the fact that if we stay at home, we don't have record. So when we go to the bank, we have this gap. We didn't work for a while. We cared for our children. The other thing is, in our country, I'm sure in every country as well, but religious women, whether we're ultra-Orthodox Jewish women or religious Muslims or women or religious Christian women, there is an issue of going out of the house. So small businesses are actually a great opportunity if we say religion matter, and if we say it is part of the society. Small businesses, mobile phones, computer really allows suddenly much more women to participate. And in Israel, that's what we discovered. And as my personal experience, you know, we are all trapped in the, doesn't matter if it's the neighborhood that we grew up or the university we were studying. We have our, you know, we have our friends and family, and if we don't reach out and look at other numbers and try to meet other cultures, which is exactly what happened to me in Jasmine, I really discovered that there are so many things I don't see within our society, and we are a small society, so I can imagine in countries which are much larger. Small businesses usually represent the whole society because it is about employing one or employing two, and it's a great, great way maybe to close or to give an answer to the number one risk that the World Economic Forum say is a risk, which is the gap between the rich and the poor. So maybe we sit here and we talk about one of the great ways to solve one of the things that threats actually the whole world.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to end up here after I ask Mari one more question. Maybe you can begin to line up. But Minister, you said, I found this quote, that we are not going to achieve higher growth and more equitable distribution of income without women's participation. And you went on to say, we need to figure out how we can forward gender issues and mainstream them. So now you conclude decade in government. What advice do you have to yourself, of course, as you go on, but to all of us as to how we close that gap?
Well, I think we have to continue our, let's say, advocacy as well as showing best practices and good examples of what works and what doesn't work. And I believe in numbers. I mean, I've been using the numbers that Hillary Clinton started in 2011, and you know how many, the funnel effect, how only 5%, I think, for the U.S. Who are women in board members, even though 50% at the entry level, and then it's 5% at the CEO level and 15% at the board level. The numbers are much smaller for Asia. Japan is one of the lowest. I think Japan is like less than 1% in CEO and 2% for board member. Indonesia is actually a bit better, 5% and 8%. And those numbers I do use, so you know, at every level, workforce, labor participation rate for women, the number on the boards, so it's at every level, and women-owned businesses. These are numbers that we use, and then the numbers are important to show how much you're missing in terms of the potential of women that you are not utilizing. And it is half of your human capital, you know. We make that argument. But then the most important argument then comes, why, what are the obstacles that cause this, right? And if you start with the women on the board, why this funnel effect? We all know that the three constraints are the family balance, family and career balance. The second is the anywhere, anytime model. That, you know, for you to go up in the corporate ladder, it's anywhere, anytime. You have to move tomorrow to London, you know, pack up and go. And that's how you advance your career. Unless the merit or the performance system is changed in that way, then, you know, you cannot advance in your career. And then the role of technology helps, working from home and so on. So, but companies have to change in the way they evaluate how that it's different, the way you evaluate merit and performance in women and men. And that has to come from enlightenment from the men who are still running the boards and in charge. And so that's why, you know, it's not just about us, you know, this is the room of the converted. the battle is out there, the unconverted, the non-converted, the ones that have to be convinced. This is why the numbers and the examples are very important. And, I think the numbers also show that having more women on the board gives you more profitability, better governance, as the secretary said. These are numbers that we need to push forward. I think mentoring, I'm a great believer in mentoring and role modeling and giving women confidence. Whether you like or not like Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In, whatever model, there are different models, but I think all of us here who have achieved some level of success, it's upon us also to help the younger women. I'm a little bit of a role model. I didn't intend to be, but I was the first woman to come back to my country with a PhD in economics. I was the first woman to do this and to do that. So, and I'm married and I have 2 children, despite my mother telling me not to do a PhD because I would never get married. So, when women come up to me and say, oh, I want to do a PhD, but I'm afraid, I'm going to be overqualified. Nobody's going to want to marry me. I said, no, look at me, Because, this is a cultural thing. There is also a cultural thing. I don't know, this is across countries or not, but there's a cultural thing in my part of the world where, if a girl wants to do well, that's not so good. Being ambitious is not so good for a girl. It's good for a boy, it's not good for a girl. These are some of the debunking of myths that we have to do. And the way we manage also, when we're tough like this, we're considered bossy, and there's another B word that I won't mention here, that we are often categorized. But for the same behavior, the men are being, oh, he's a firm leadership, he's a good leader. These are cultural issues which we also continue to face, but we should never give up, right? And we should continue to work on the unconverted and show by example, get the pilot projects, get the good examples out there. And technology, I really also, all of you have said, I think technology is a great answer, because a lot of the informal sector in my country, it's women working from home, making handicrafts, making food, whatever, And so e-commerce, selling online is a great answer for women, and I would encourage all of us to work hard on that as a tool for women.
Well, we have some of those cultural issues here too. Okay, can you tell us your name, the school you're in, and what your question is, and who it's directed to? Somebody's classes must be starting.
So my name is Wen Jun, and then I'm a law student. So I'm from China. First of all, thank you very much for coming down to share your perspectives. It's a wonderful talk, and I really appreciate it. I have 2 questions, and they are both addressed to Ms. Sherry Blair. My first question is there any threshold or qualification to the mentorship program at Sherry Blair Foundation? Does having a business idea suffice, to the program? Second, I think we will all agree that the women entrepreneur culture is more profound in developed country like US and UK than developing country. So is it part of the current or future strategy of the foundation to kind of cultivate the culture in developing country to reach out to people who don't have the notion yet? Thank you.
So Cherie, before you answer that, I'm going to take a couple more questions, and then the panel can finish by answering whichever one is appropriate.
Hi, my name is Nicole Macan Ramirez. I'm a student in the SFS. My question, first of all, is to say that the 5 women currently sitting on the stage in front of me have achieved things that many of us could possibly never dream of achieving, and probably never will. Yet, on a scale, for me, a lot of these achievements seem to be directed toward a micro scale. And my question for whoever one of you wishes to answer is, how do you bring these achievements into a macro forum? How do you identify the flaws in governments, in the financial systems, in infrastructures that exist on a macro scale? And how do you breach that gap, not only between gender, but between development, if I'm making sense.
Well, that's a wallop. Okay. Another one?
Hi, thank you so much for being here today. My name is Shilpa, and I'm a senior in the School of Business, and I've been very involved in the Georgetown Entrepreneurship Initiative. And I think one of the things I've learned the most is how important entrepreneurial ecosystems are to really accelerating growth and innovation. Having resources and peer entrepreneurs in a physical proximity, in a physical space, really makes it easier for people to pursue those. So my question is, how do you cultivate those self-sustaining entrepreneurial ecosystems in developing countries so that that sort of innovation and change can be systemic and can come from within those countries as opposed to maybe us thinking that we know all the answers?
Good. So Cherie, quick answer from you, and then we'll go to the macro question, okay, and then the one on sustaining entrepreneurship. Okay, and then we'll come back.
Okay, in relation to the question about who our mentees are, we aim our mentorship program to mentees who already have an existing business. We found actually that we get more progress with someone who's got a business and wants to take it to the next stage. However, that's not to say that we don't also have startup businesses. And when we first started the mentoring platform, we did have a lot of young women in particular who were just starting their businesses. But we found, in fact, that they need the sort of ecosystem that the third question was talking about to help them get started, whereas the mentoring was actually much more helpful to women who had already started on their business journey and just kind of got to a stage where they weren't quite sure where next. As a matter of interest, when we're looking for our mentors, we tend to look for people with about 7 years experience. We don't actually want the CEO to be the mentor because their experience is so remote in some ways, but we are looking for those people, like the people in the Bank of America, who are on their journey, if you like, to becoming the CEO, but still have some lot of practical hands-on experience. I did want to say something about ecosystems, actually, because we have an enterprise development program. We've done a lot in Israel, in Lebanon. We're just about to take it to the UAE, where we do general business training, and then we take a smaller group and do coaching for those businesses, and then finally we take a smaller group again, and over a year give them business incubation and support. And for example, in the Lebanon, when we did our first project there with 40 women, we managed to create over that year 60 new jobs. So I think ecosystems are important. I think you have a point about that. And how do we encourage entrepreneurship? I'm not sure I agree, by the way, that the developing world isn't full of entrepreneurs. I think it actually is full of entrepreneurs. It's just often it's not acknowledged that what the market women are doing, what the people in the informal economy, what the woman who's baking cakes, not just for herself, but her neighbors and her friends, or the hairdresser, they're actually all entrepreneurs. Just no one's ever told them that that's what they do, and no one has ever helped them to be able to see that actually they could do that not just for the people they know, but for a wider community, which is why the Facebook opportunity, which helps women to use Facebook to get friends virtually who then become their customers, has been such a success.
So I'll try to take a brief explanation on the macro. First of all, macro, I think that there is a sea change that has happened over the last couple of years, where transparency is so much more in the forefront of business, government, nonprofits. It isn't that you like everything you see, but you're going to see it all. And once you see it all, it allows you to, I think, reorder things. So whether that is in any walk of life, because of social media, because the world has become less institutional and I think more human, and I don't mean that in a soft way, I mean that individuals have a larger voice, whether you're looking at the Arab Spring or you're looking at what happened with the financial services industry, or you look at any kind of investigation that's going on. Transparency is so much more prominent, and more people are at the table, and there's very little you can't do that something isn't going to be out there. I'm not saying that can't happen, but that's a huge difference. And the second thing, and you were saying, so how do you scale these ideas? there is nothing that happens, you don't begin anything on a big scale. You beta it. In the largest companies, so we're a large company, you beta something. You see how it's going to go. You test it. You test and learn, and then you expand it. So all the things we're talking about here today, whether it's Marie or Ofer or Cherie or myself, each of us will take something away and apply it, because that's how businesses go, small and large. You don't just arrive on the stage doing something big. You begin in a small way and you work it. If it works, then you develop it more. So, I mean, I would say both of those things. And the last thing, I would expect all the people in this room to achieve whatever we've achieved and more. That's sort of a given. That's the hope of everybody, that the next generation is bigger, better than we are.
So before I turn to Ofra and Mari for the last comments, I'm going to take one more, I'm sorry, and they can factor it into their answer.
Okay. Hi, my name is Anna, and I'm a senior in the School of Business. And I read recently of a study mentioned in a recent Bloomberg article that 9 out of 10 women polled on Wall Street said that they believed that their male counterparts earned a higher wage. Now, as women in positions of incredible influence, what reasons do you see for this persisting wage differential between women and men? And what are some actionable solutions that you would propose to combat this inequity? Thank you.
Well, quickly, I think the first thing is, if you think that's happening, ask. Be bold. Second thing is, I think that I can't speak for every industry, but because of the way of the world in human resources, as a woman that's in a position that would be looking at what the other people are making in men, you ask, you check, and you have human resources verify for you, so that you're not wondering, you know. And once you know, it'll change.
Yeah, I would just say, we are the result of the last 100 years, okay? So I think if you look at the next 100 years, there's much more data. It's much more of an issue. Everyone talks about it. I just give you the World Economic Forum. It used to be the small rooms where women were talk. Now, it's mainly on the main stage. So the gap between men and women, the access to, whether it's capital, education, it's measured. So there is much more data, which means there's much more to be done. So I think that you, the young people who study now, have much more women, okay, have much more opportunities that our generation had, because everyone talks about it, the numbers are there. Even kind of punishment of not doing the right thing is there. So on a positive and a very optimistic look to the future, I think at least most of those things like measurement, understanding that it is the right ethical thing, that it is about a moral thing, that it is about a business case, it's all there. So I think things will be better if we'll all just make the right efforts to really ask for them, insist on them, and the men will join us at the end. So if it felt that we are unique, yes, we are unique, because the last 100 years it was less of an issue. Now you hear the next generation of presidents, ministers actually talk about those things when they run for their seats at the top of this world. So I think it will be easier for you, girls and women, in the next 100 years.
Yeah, I think we are way ahead compared to 100 years ago, or even 20 years ago, when the study in our universities were showing that girls were underperforming academically. because they didn't want to lose out getting a boyfriend. This is empirically shown in our case. And then 20 years later, they are not underperforming academically no more, you know, and we have found that 60%, 70% of the girls are getting better grades than the boys, et cetera, et cetera. So they don't worry about things like that. So we are advancing, but I think the battle is still out there. I believe in the economic argument very much, that that's the one that's going to win the battle, that women are the economic drivers. It makes economic sense. It makes business sense. Therefore, right from birth all the way to when they're corporate leaders, we have to make sure that whether it's a policy regulation that has to be changed, and institutional that has to be changed, or cultural or mindset has to be changed all the way. So from birth, 0 to 5, nutrition and health, access to education, equal access to education. It's about building the human capital, all the way to job opportunities and access to capital. These are all the stops that we have to continue to advocate and make the policy changes, make the advocacy, make the changes. And it's not just women who will make it, it has to be the men. So there's a huge education out there that we need to do, and I'm sure that all of us in this room and the younger generation will be continuing to do this together. Thank you.
Well, those are perfect last words. The journey continues. Before we all thank our panelists, I want to thank the council members who are still here. I know airplane schedules have intervened for some. I want to thank the women ambassadors who are here. I just noticed so many of you are here. It's wonderful to have you. I want to thank Zin Marung for coming. She spent more than a decade in prison in Myanmar, Burma, and now is running her own NGOs to move Myanmar forward. So thank you, Zin Mar. And Claudia Paz, sitting next to her, is the former Attorney General of Guatemala. And because of her, they've made great progress in terms of justice in that country. So, to all of the women leaders here, to all the inspiration here, to all of you who are going to take over, we wish you well. And the council has a lot of work to do, but final thanks to our extraordinary panel.